Hello, friend, and welcome to Sturdy Girl, a podcast focused on strength, not size, where you'll hear conversations around healthy body image, cultivating confidence, and being a resilient human in both body and mind. Sturdy Girl is the podcast where we shift the focus away from your appearance and on to living the big, rad life you deserve. Kerry, thanks so much for being on the podcast. I'm stoked you're here. Can you tell me a little bit about you, what you do, your journey, and how you got there?
Yes. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me. I'm so stoked to chat all things stress, body image, and wherever else this takes us today.
It'll take us in other directions.
I'm sure. I'm sure it always does in the best way possible. But by trade, I'm a doctor of physical therapy, a 500-hour yoga teacher, a personal trainer, and all sorts of other little certifications and continuing ed. I am definitely one of those continuous life learners, and probably sometimes too much because I just love all the things about health and the human body. And I also will often say to people, like, I am the product of my own experiences. I joke sometimes that a series of unfortunate events led me to kind of practice and view the human body in the way that I do now. And while that sounds, sad or upsetting, it's actually been a really beautiful journey that's gotten me here. And I don't think I'd be the practitioner or the yoga teacher or just the person I am today without all those experiences, wrapping it up and leading me to the way I treat people in front of me today.
I think that we all go through shit.
Right.
And It's not pretty and it's probably sad, but it shapes us into who we are today, the choices that we make to get ourselves to where we are today.
I think it's been like, even just like in terms of stress, like my own journey with understanding stress. I work with a lot of my clients these days with pain and also how stress affects pain. So I work with a lot of chronic pain clients or just recurring pain, a lot of people with chronic illness or chronic pain and how stress affects that. And then how that affects how we treat our body, how we look at our body, how we talk to our body. And that's also things that I've been through before. So I can understand when my clients are coming into me and some of the things they're saying, I'm like, no, I really do understand that because I've been there before. I felt those feelings that you're feeling right now.
You have such a well-rounded, I don't know if that's the word I want, just experience and education as far as like, yes, physical therapy. So yeah, when people are coming to you in pain, you have the direction on how you want them to maybe move their bodies, whether that's something that's body weight or weighted or whatever. But you also have this training in yoga. So you're able to further the movement in a way that's more of a flow, if you will.
Yeah, 100%.
But then having the training on stress management as well, because you're like, maybe this pain you are having is as a result of all these other stressors. Because I'll speak personally for a second, any of the, I'm going to say injuries with air quotes here, but any weird pains that have come up for me over the years end up being related to like, oh, you just started a new job and you bought a new house and you moved. And now your lower back is starting to act up when you resumed powerlifting. Yeah. So here's the thing. Let's adapt the volume. Let's find the manageable load, right? There's so many pieces that stress kind of reflects. So I can't imagine how great those conversations you end up having with clients. But I'm also wondering if someone comes to you for PT and then you end up having a conversation about stress, are they like, wait, no, I came to you because my shoulder's messed up. And you're like, well, they're connected.
Yep. You just read my mind. I was going to say, it's great to have these conversations. And like the people, oftentimes I am people's like last resort, I'll say, especially some more of my chronic illness, chronic pain folks. They're like, I've tried everything. I don't know what else to do. Someone recommended you. So I'm in your hands. It can't get worse. And
can you fix me?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like a bit of a challenge, but they're also like, I believe you. And they're coming from a different perspective. But I do also, especially literally the story you just told, it was me last May. Like I just moved, just started some new position. So I had a low back spasm last May. So I literally been there. And then I have some other people who just, know me from the community, know me as a yoga teacher, like, oh, I'd love to work with you, a physical therapist. So when I start asking them questions about like, what are your stress levels like? Are you sleeping? Like, are you eating enough? And I'm not a nutritionist, but my concern is like, are you getting enough calories in so that your body doesn't feel like it's in panic mode 24/7?
Absolutely. Well, and those pieces of biofeedback, right? Are you eating enough? Are you drinking enough? Are you sleeping enough? How's your stress management? How's your hunger levels? How's your digestion? All of those things are so important.
Right. And so many people are like, but like, it's just this one spot in my shoulder. I'm like, I promise we'll wrap it all up in a nice little bow in a moment. It's not gonna be like a perfect bow, but it'll have some scragglies in it, but we'll like bring it all together. So you're like, oh, I can understand how this stress and this kind of move is affecting how I feel in my physical body. And I'll be honest, some people understand it. Some people still are like, no, but I just want to focus on the shoulder. And I get that. I kind of have to meet everyone where they are in their journey. And sometimes it's going to be easier than others.
For sure. I do have a couple of very good friends who are also physical therapists. And it is interesting the general understanding of physical therapy and what it does and why you go see someone for PT. And then there's a lot of the practitioners now that are like, no, there's so much different of an approach. Like, I'm not just going to fix your body. That's not how this works. I'm really fortunate for the PTs that I've been around because it's helped me to adjust so that when like right now I am actually going through a weird shoulder thing from low bar squatting and from building a deck. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I need to go to PT. They're going to fix me. And then like my friend Taylor, who's a PT, is like, Jessica, no, that's not how it works. Yeah. Which I know, but we want that fix. We want to have that thing that's going to be the answer to make it better.
100%. And it's definitely something I struggle with as a practitioner. And I've definitely struggled with also on the flip side as a patient. Like I've gone through my own burnout journey and been like, well, just tell me the one thing that's going to fix this because I'm done. All the doctor's appointments and whatnot. And also as a practitioner, it's easier to take that step back and to be like, okay, let's look at the bigger picture. And the way I often will help introduce this to people is patterns. Like I love a good journal and note taking. So that's probably where it comes from too. So, let's just look at patterns. Like, how do you feel on a Monday versus a Friday? How do you feel after, a 12-hour shift versus a 6-hour shift? When is your pain worse and when is it better? And a lot of times when we're in pain, it's such a, for lack of a better word, painful experience. It challenges this whole idea of how we think our bodies should be working and how we think our bodies should be. And then, we can talk even get into that whole like having to change your exercise routine and what role that plays on people's mental health and how there's so many like nuances to this. And when it comes down to it is some people don't even realize, oh, my pain actually feels better now than it did 2 hours ago, but it felt worse at the end of the day. Like we're not always in tune with the ebbs and flows of it as much. And so it can just get very overwhelming and like, oh my gosh, just get rid of this, fix this, work some magic.
It's wrong. This feels wrong. Make it stop.
Exactly. Instead of like, oh yeah, Saturday, I felt pretty good. I forgot. Like I went to pizza with friends and then I went for a hike and then I went out to dinner and then I slept well and I had really no pain versus if you have 2 10-hour days in a row, like, oh my goodness, everything hurts.
I'm laughing because that's literally been me with my shoulder. And when I'm like, oh yeah, during the work week, it gets really bad because I am retracting mouths with this arm. And then on the weekends, it gets a little better. Like, yeah, you have to follow those pieces of it. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's segue a little bit. I mean, we kind of touched on a little bit of what you do, a little bit about your journey, but I was curious to talk a little bit about potentially stress and its impacts on body image, on our own well-being.
Yes, I love this. I think my journey always like peppers in a little bit along the way because, like I said, I definitely learned through different stages of my journey. I learned and then I felt it, or I felt it, then I learned. So it's always interesting how it intermingles. And I'm sure, a few people feel that way out there. But when it comes to stress and body image, I think it's really important to understand the stress response in the body, then that kind of cascade of effects. And I'll say one thing that kind of blows people's mind is that stress in itself is not inherently a bad thing. And in order to grow, to change, heck, to build muscle, to get stronger, to learn, we need stress. Stress is what has pushed evolution along. It has what pushed our own personal growth and professional growth along. And even our physical bodies. Like if you can't run, I'm just using running as the example, even though I'm not a runner. Like if you can't run 1 mile, then you're not going to run 26 miles. And in order to run 26 miles, you need to stress your body with the 1 mile, or running and exercise in itself is stress on the body too. But we see it as a bit, I think a lot of people see stress and exercise not as the same, when exercise has the same effect on our body as some stressors do. And it's good stresses pushing us forward, that sort of thing. So that idea of stress is not inherently bad, I feel like I always have to start with. Stress is not bad.
It's part of life. Are you familiar with Steve Magnus at all? He's written a few books, but in one of them, it's called Peak Performance.
Oh, and yes, I have that book.
Their entire equation is stress plus rest equals growth.
Yes. Yep.
And any of my clients listening are like, oh my God, Jessica, I've heard this 100 times. But it's true. If you stress the body and you rest, equals growth. It's the same for life situations. It's how muscles grow. It's how we grow.
Exactly. And I think that's important to know. Then you look at, okay, how does stress really affect us? So stress at its core, it is our body's response to a certain stimulus. So stress in itself is just a response to a stimulus. That stimulus can be a back squat. That stimulus can be an email from your boss. It can be a fight with your partner. It can be a hard hike. It can be so many different things. And when we get stressed, regardless of the stimulus is, a neurochemical kind of cascade happens where our body enters fight, flight, or freeze mode. So our body gets ready to either fight the stressor, run from the stressor, or freeze in more extreme situation. And once again, none of those responses are bad. If you are trying to hype yourself up, I'm thinking back to I played college lacrosse. Like before a game, we'd want to hype ourselves up, get ready for it. So you want to get your heart rate up. You want to get the blood flowing. You want to increase your respiratory rate because that's going to help you perform. Same thing, like if you're giving a presentation in front of the room, like I give a lot of corporate presentation, I don't want to be falling asleep and like in getting ready for bed mode. I want to be ready to stand tall and project my voice and give my lecture. So stress and the response to stress is enabling us to do those things. And what happens in our modern society is that we get stuck there. We get stuck in being constantly in fight or flight mode. So we never push over to the other edge, which is parasympathetic rest and digest mode, which I feel like a lot of people are commonly know rest and digest and fight or flight. So we never move out of that fight or flight into rest and digest. And rest and digest mode is when our muscles heal, when our body fights back illness, when our brain makes more neural synapses. Like you said, stress plus rest equals growth. And in order to grow, you need both. And when we get stuck in the stress, that's when I really see that negative effect on body image, on self-confidence, on just how we feel as a human being in our body, mentally and physically.
You said you see it more when people get stuck in that
fight or flight,
higher stressor. Yeah, absolutely. You're in a heightened emotional state.
Yep.
You're more reactive. And that in turn changes the way we experience our bodies.
Exactly. And also, if we're in fight or flight for so long, it can increase inflammation in our body, decrease our body's ability to digest food, decrease our organs' abilities to do their work. Because when we're in fight or flight mode, all the blood is taken from our organs. It goes to our brain and our muscles to get us out of that situation. So if our blood is always shunted to other areas, it's going to shut down some necessary processes. Even, I think back to myself, and part of my burnout experience was twofold. I was in a physical therapy job where I was, seeing 22 patients throughout, an 8-hour day without a lunch break. So not only was I not eating, but then I also had this weird guilt about going to the bathroom. So like I wouldn't go to the bathroom. I would like hold everything in. Yeah, it was terrible. And then I got to this point where, for maybe TMI, but I was chronically constipated because I was just ignoring my body's signals throughout my workday. And then my body could not literally get rid of the waste that I was producing because it was so, muscles were tight. I was not allowing myself to rest and digest. And I'm sorry, but if anyone out there has ever been constipated, you don't feel so great about how your body looks. It's just not a time when you're like, oh, I'm feeling great when you're just constipated. It's just not.
It's almost a distraction from everything else, for sure.
Exactly.
With the body image piece and stress, I was just thinking about our emotions in a stressful time are really heightened. Right? It changes how you perceive your body. Our body image is the lens with which we view our body. High stress times distort that. It amplifies, it can amplify what we see because these are our perception. Body image isn't actually how we appear, really, physically. It's how we perceive our appearance. And yeah, when we're stressed, there's that inflammatory response, but then there's also that like, well, I'm stressed and I can't get this done. And all of these things are going on. And it takes and distorts it enough that it's like a funhouse mirror sometimes when you look in the the mirror when you're stressed. And suddenly that body image is a lot harder to kind of stay at a baseline that is, healthier or more flexible. I don't know if you're familiar with body image flexibility at all.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Big fan. Just from that piece where you're not talking body positivity. We're not talking body neutrality. We're talking body image flexibility. And stress, from what I have seen, have read, takes and makes that body image a little more rigid.
Well, there's so many pieces to that, but I think one thing that just came to mind when you're saying that is when you're stressed like that for so long, I personally see we're trying to control more then. We're trying to control. And when you're talking about body image flexibility, you're not really controlling, you're kind of witnessing. And when you're so stressed that you're just trying to grasp onto anything that you can do to feel better, I see that in myself and in my clients, you start to pick things apart because you think that you can control that instead of just witnessing how you feel and are experiencing your emotions and your physical sensation. And to also add to that is you said, our emotional reactivity is higher. Our physical sensations can also be higher. And we kind of dissociate from where we actually are in the moment. Some people do. So add that all together and your ability to stay flexible and stay in that witness role kind of goes out the window.
And there can also be the response too, if you're kind of fixating and changing or controlling your body, that a lot of times becomes a response to stress. Yes. Well, I have all of these stressful things going on in my life. What is something that I can control? Can I control my body? Can I control what it looks like, what it does? And so then it can give a person the illusion that they're addressing the stressor or addressing the situation and creating an answer or a solution when it's actually just deflecting.
Yeah.
In a way.
And I see that more often when it's external stressors, when it's kind of out of someone's control, whether it be work-related stressors or even just another family member that say is sick, it's something that you can't fix. Then you look to, okay, what can I fix then?
Yep.
Fix, I should say, in air quotes, because it's really, you're not really fixing anything. You're just trying to get that.
Yeah. But I know
you're just trying to get control over it.
That's the answer that your brain looks for.
Exactly. Like, what can I fix? I can't make this person happier. I can't fix this at my job. So what's something within my control? And often, to your point, that goes back to, okay, people micromanaging what they're doing with their body and then how they're viewing their body, even though their body really isn't the stressor. It's just happening as a product of the stressor.
Yeah. And it's one of those too that maybe it is turning back to your body as the thing to control. And then it takes away energy from maybe addressing the actual situation that is stressful. So you're like addressing a symptom, if you will, right? Because it's the emotional piece of it that then reflects in our body image and then ignoring the symptom. And so you're avoiding and you're like, okay, well, maybe I need to shove these emotions down. And then, okay, now maybe it's starting a new diet or a new exercise plan or do some kind of quick fix, like getting my hair done or doing new makeup or buying new clothes or something like that, almost as like a deflection from the actual situation. It's a very unsustainable way to, I'm going to say, manage, air quotes, manage our stress.
Yeah, no, 100%. And I think, we can't put down or can't forget about the role that media, and not even just social media, but just messaging has played a role in all this. There's so many pieces to that too, that it feels like, okay, when everything's out of control, what is in my control? And especially, I might, overgeneralization, I think for women, it is even more so, well, this isn't my control because the media is telling me that this isn't my control, that this is the only thing that isn't in my control when I can't control anything else.
I think another piece of this too, that I feel like I come back to when it comes to confidence and body image a lot is awareness. Because if we can develop self-awareness around situations, and it takes practice, like I just throw it out there like, oh yeah, develop awareness. It's not that easy. But for me personally, I just started a new job. Even though this job is wonderful, it is still stressful. Right. It was stressful leaving the previous position to start the new position. It was a lot. It is stressful. I have developed enough awareness around my own response to stress to know, okay, when I am stressed, I have a tendency to pick apart the tiny things about myself or my body for absolutely no reason because it gives me a sense of control because I can't 100%. Control how stressed I feel about settling into this new job.
Yep. Yep.
So that's what I do. And then realizing like, oh, you're doing it again.
And it's a pattern of awareness.
Totally. And the tendency towards, and I'll speak for myself personally, I can't generalize, but the tendency towards, well, I'm feeling this stress, maybe I need to switch up what I'm doing for my physical activity.
Yeah.
And now it's not the, program hopping and that kind of thing. I'm a power lifter and I will forever power lift as long as my body allows. I freaking love it. And I also have on and off seasons of running. Like those are still things, but my brain will be like, do we need to go into a hypertrophy phase and maybe add in some more running? Maybe the answer to your stress right now is to go for a really long run, even though you've only been running 3 to 4 miles at a time.
Because you're looking for something to control. And it's even farther than control. You're looking for something to almost feel something other than the stress.
Absolutely. But I guess kind of circling back to my point is like that stress brings so much more attention on your body because we live this entire experience in our bodies. And so when we're stressed, you're like, well, what's going on in my body? And there's a difference between like the awareness piece of, oh, I'm more stressed. So I'm noticing like my digestion has changed. I'm more stressed. I'm noticing that crap, it's taking me a lot longer to fall asleep. Those things, the awareness piece of then, okay, how can I minimize this stress? How can I handle it versus turning the attention towards our bodies and you're like, oh my God, what's wrong with me? I'm going to do all of these other things to like change and fix. It's the mindset on how you go about those actions.
And I think often, and you alluded to it earlier, some of that comes around when we're not really allowing ourselves to feel the feelings associated with stress, because it's challenging to feel sad or angry or all those emotions that can come with it. This is maybe not like the best example, but say your example, you're starting a new job, it's stressful, and you're kind of, I've experienced in the past, like, oh, I'm annoyed at myself that this is stressful. Like, why? And that adds more stress to my plate. I really, truly don't want to feel annoyed at myself because that's an uncomfortable feeling to feel. So let me just be annoyed at little things like, oh, this pants feels too tight, or, oh, I feel like a little this. And then you start sitting in the mirror and picking apart your body because you really don't want to sit with the emotion of being annoyed at yourself, which ultimately goes back to you don't want to sit with the fact that this is a new experience, talking from personal experience. This is a new experience and it's a little scary and daunting while also being exciting. And that's really complicated for ourselves and our minds to be like, oh, it's exciting. Oh my gosh, this is terrifying. It's too much that we don't want to really accept just yet.
How hard is it for us as humans to acknowledge our emotions?
Oh my gosh.
And sit with them. That's something that I have loved reading about, like acceptance and commitment therapy. And they talk a lot about being able to acknowledge thoughts as they come up and not attach to them and let them go. But it's a lot about acknowledgement and awareness of present situation without judgment. I mean, I think we talk a lot of non-judgment when you talk like Buddhist principles, right? And like yogic tradition. Yeah. And I love that. But being able to acknowledge and sit with those, I'm annoyed at myself because yes, I completely resonate with that because same part of this new job situation is I'm getting up at 5 a.m.
Ooh, yeah.
And a decade ago when I was in the thick of back-to-back marathon training, I was up at 5 every day to go run. Mm-hmm. But there's a difference between getting up and doing something you love and that you're like training for this goal, it's fun, and getting up for work. And that 5 a.m. wake up has been brutal. And I get so annoyed with myself because my brain is like at 3% capacity at 5 a.m. to get ready. Yeah. And I have to set stuff out the night before. And I have to make sure that everything is like, okay, you need to take this paperwork in. Okay, put your keys on top of it on the counter so that before you leave, you take it with you. Right. And just that acknowledgement of, I've been annoyed at myself because I'm like, you are not functioning where you should be right now. And then you have to be like, okay, but I'm also like, stressed. I'm getting used to a new sleep schedule. I'm getting used to trying to acknowledge those pieces of this is a stressful season and this will go away.
I love that. I say that often, like, this is a season. I work with a lot of people who there's a lot of body image wrapped up in that because there's that added layer of, well, now my body's not doing what I ask of it. So then the body image is so rooted in, well, I'm broken, and picking apart themselves for not only how they look, but how they can or cannot function. And there's this, I don't know exactly how I want to say it, but this judgment always. There's so much judgment around it. And that can also play such a negative role. There's judgment not only about the body image, but there's judgment about how you're feeling, which then puts more pressure on the body image piece. And at the end of the day, then your brain is just kind of cognitively overloaded sometimes. It's just like, where am I? What am I doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Any thoughts on stress impacting self-confidence at all?
Yeah. I think
it's so intertwined, but I just was curious if you had any like separate thoughts there.
No, that's a really great question, because I think it's another interesting thing where some stress and rising to the challenge of stress can increase our self-confidence, right? Like say, example, powerlifting, like that's stressful. Like that's placing a stress on the body, but then you like complete a power lift and you're like, wow, I was able to complete that task. And let's take it out of the body performance realm even, because let's talk about this new job of yours, showing up for yourself and keeping promises to yourself, even if that's just like, I am going to wake up at 5 a.m. and get my butt to work every day this week, and doing that successfully with all your things in tow, all the paperwork, all the lunch, rising to that challenge and being like, wow, look, I just did that week. I completed it. Great work. That increases your self-confidence. So on one hand, stress can also be a useful way to increase self-confidence, but then you tip over that tipping point where it's no longer helping you increase. And it's just like, I'm the worst. I can't get anything done. I'm awful. I look awful. And the negative thought spiral just takes you to zero self-confidence. And it's just this kind of like teeter-totter of like finding that right balance where like, I'm rising to the challenges. I can handle this without going off the deep end of a negative thought spiral.
Exactly. I'm just nodding my head over here because I'm like, yes, all of these things. Because confidence, I love Mel Robbins defines confidence as the willingness to try, because confidence is a skill.
Yeah, for sure.
It's that willingness to try and try again and try again and try again. And that's how confidence is built. Mm-hmm. And so when you're talking about doing the thing and being like, wow, I'm proud of myself. I did this uncomfortable thing. I did this thing that may have been the just manageable challenge. And you repeat that over and over, and it builds that confidence skill.
Yep. The willingness is there when you have evidence to show that you're capable of it. You need the evidence to be willing to try sometimes.
And that in turn decreases the resistance to doing the thing.
Yep. 100%.
Yeah. I don't know that I will ever not have resistance to 5 a.m.
Yeah, that's fair. I don't think I will either.
So like there's decreasing resistance, but I don't know that there's much confidence in myself for getting up at 5 a.m. every day.
Yeah, that's
I had a friend tell me who's like, oh my gosh, it's not too bad at all to get up at 5. It's the first couple weeks that are the hardest. And then you just keep getting up at 5 a.m. every day and it gets easier. And I was like, ain't nobody getting up at 5 a.m. on a Saturday.
Yeah, exactly. No. You're like, not for me. Not for me.
No, absolutely not.
I think to your point there, because I've had early wake up calls for a large portion of my career. And I noticed I still didn't like getting up at 5 a.m., but I was getting more confident that I would actually do it and not press snooze 5 times. Sometimes.
You'd actually wake up to your alarm. Okay. Yes.
Yeah, but when I first started a 5 a.m. job, I was like, snooze.
And then you wake up freaking out, running out the door.
Exactly.
Okay, I'm not going to lie. And I don't know this actually has any applicable context beyond just my own experience. But the only way my first week at this new job that I got out of bed on time was I was like, if you get out of bed on time and you get out the door on time, you have time to stop at Starbucks and get coffee.
Yes.
I bribed myself. I was like, okay, how are you doing? I'm like, I really just want cold brew with some salted caramel cold foam on top.
Yes.
Like, okay, I'll get out of bed.
One of my mentors says something like, I just work for the little treats that I give myself throughout the day. And I was like, I feel that so hard.
Emotional support coffee is a real thing.
It is. And I love the idea of little treats. I'm like, oh, good. I answer my emails, little treats.
Yeah. We're basically all children.
Yeah, exactly.
So my aunt and I love to hike, and she has a good friend with a couple of kids, and she always takes candy so that if they start getting a little bored or a little grouchy or whatever, she pulls out candy. Here's some gummy candy.
I love that.
Keeps them going. And then she's telling me this, and I'm reaching into my pack for like Sour Patch Kids. And I'm like, me too? Why do you think? I'm like, why do you think I like the trail? Whether it's hiking or trail running, I mean, I always have gummy candy.
It's brilliant.
Like your little power-ups. And
I love that. It's brilliant. And honestly, to take that back around to like stress management really that's what I always say. It's those little things that really help, like little small tools and tips. And, we're joking about coffee and candy, but even just like little ways to show up for yourself. And sometimes that is a coffee or a candy. Other times it's deeper and it's more elaborate, but stress management really comes back to those little things that you can do. And in my opinion, and this might not be the most most science-backed opinion, but I've seen it over and over again. It's showing up for yourself in a way that feels caring in the moment.
We talk a lot about nourishing ourselves.
Yes. Yeah.
And whether that means that you are eating nutrient-dense foods or that means that you are nourishing your mind with a book that you wanted to read, right? But those things of like taking care of you.
I actually used to run a group coaching program called Nourish Your Nervous System. You know, there's so many ways that people can manage stress out there. And there's so many different tools and techniques and schools of thought. And what I've really found over the years is it's not always exactly about the what, but about finding what works for you. And that's going to be different for every single person. Something that feels nourishing to me, like for me, getting out into the woods and going on a hike is very nourishing for me. Some people, it's not. That's a task. That's a chore. That's an exercise only. But that fills me back up in a way that other things don't. And to your point, like sometimes that's going to be your favorite, like, oh my gosh, I'm thinking like my favorite comfort food is buffalo chicken pizza. And like sometimes I just need a buffalo chicken pizza. And then other times I'm like, okay, I have a really like next week I'm doing a certification and I'm like, I have a really full week next week. I know that if I at least have some nourishing nutrient food in the morning to fuel myself, that's going to feel really nourishing so that I feel better capable to handle whatever's thrown my way that day. And so maybe I meal prep in advance and that's going to work for next week, but that might not work for the week after that. And it's finding what works for you when and having those tools because you then can really feel that ricochet effect on your mental, your emotional health, and how you see yourself in this world.
As you start to build awareness around your response to stress and stressful situations, you can anticipate how to take care of yourself. Because a lot of this too, as we're talking about all these stressful situations, a lot of it doesn't have to do with the actual situation.
Yes.
It's the emotions that we have and our reactions to the situation, the stress response.
Yes.
And then how we take care of ourselves in that. So these tips as far as ways to nourish your body, ways to maybe prepare for that stressful week ahead. So for me with my 5 a.m. wake ups and knowing that the brain isn't working that early. So then it's the coffee maker is already set and ready if I'm not going to go to Starbucks. I have oatmeal already out next to the bowl. And I mean, I wear black scrubs every day. So it's not like I have to pick out my outfit. That doesn't take much brain power, right? But you minimize and you plan that piece, or it's knowing like, you know what, I prepped all of my lunches for the week. I eat the same thing for breakfast and lunch all during the work week. Yeah. We've grocery shopped so that by the time I get home from work, I don't have to ask, what do you want for dinner? It's, hey, do we want burgers tonight or do we want chicken?
Right. When you do all those things, like how does that feel in your physical and mental body versus if you didn't do any of those things?
Meal prep while I'm doing it is not my favorite thing.
Right. I get that.
So in the moment, it's kind of like, meh, this is what I have to do. But the rest of it, just knowing like I'm setting myself up for having a smoother day so that I already know that this is stressful, but this is how I'm going to get through it.
Yeah, exactly. You're providing yourself with those skills or those coping strategies beforehand.
Or just knowing like the work schedule is super busy right now. The office that I'm at, we are finishing up a remodel. So we've been in a temp office, which has been so much fun. Yeah. But it's made it so like my breaks are a little bit shorter. And I don't say that like, oh, they don't give me a lunch break. They do. I just choose to use my time to finish chart notes, prep for the rest of the day, get things cleaned up to move back into the office. So I brought more snacks.
Yeah. Love that.
Versus a full meal. So it's an easy, I chopped up an apple. I, had a protein bar. I ate some yogurt, like those pieces instead of like a sit down full meal.
And that goes back to your point on self-awareness. You're able to make those choices because you are aware of what your needs are. And when you were just talking, that kind of reminded me of some of my experiences with like the opposite of that, when I haven't developed that. Well, the opposite and also the same. Like I know when I'm stressed and in that chronic stress state and I'm not taking care of myself, I know one of my first kind of reactions is like having a lot of really challenging feelings around sensations in my body. So this is like a really silly one. Like my sensory processing is a little bit more challenged when I'm in that high stress mode. So things like wearing too tight of pants or wearing the wrong bra or too many layers. I know that I'm more sensitive to those things when I'm in high stress mode. And I also know when I'm more sensitive to those things is when I tend to look in the mirror and then pick pick apart my body image because I'm feeling, my pants are too tight. So that must mean that I'm fat, or my bra doesn't fit. So that must mean this. And I start to tell myself these stories about what's going on when really the problem isn't my body or even the clothes. It's the original stress. So I don't always have the self-awareness to prevent it, but I've developed over the years this self-awareness of sitting with this uncomfortable sensation in my body and not blaming myself for feeling this way, witnessing it and being like, this really has nothing to do with how you look or how you think you look, and a lot to do with you're in a really stressful experience. So your brain's just trying to place blame on something else. Like, it's not about those jeans. You wore those jeans 2 nights ago. It's about how you're feeling. And, there's so many different layers to that too. And sometimes that looks like, oh, maybe that means like, I really don't want to go out tonight. Like, I kind of need a night into myself. Or maybe it's like, okay, I know that I've kind of hit my upper limit of stress and I can feel it in my physical body and I can feel how it's affecting my body image and my confidence and my self-talk. So we need to put in some tools and strategies to help moving forward.
I love that this has all just come back to awareness of learning that, because it takes a lot of trial and error, and it takes a lot of, like you said, you can't catch yourself necessarily before that maybe negative thought spiral starts, but you catch yourself in it and you're like, oh, yeah, no, you're stressed. Okay, let's acknowledge these feelings because they're there and they're valid, but I don't have to identify with them because I understand where they're coming from.
Right. And I think that goes back to what you said about body image flexibility. It's this acknowledgement of how you're feeling too, and how that's playing a role as well in how you're seeing yourself, and even how you're feeling in yourself, how you're feeling physically, but also mentally and emotionally.
Absolutely. So any other tips for managing stress or maybe managing body image during high stress times?
Yeah. So let's dive into that a little bit. I think to your point and to what it keeps coming back around to is developing some sort of self-awareness practice. So whether that's journaling or even, some people aren't journalers, that's totally fine. When I work with some of my clients, say, let's just do a daily check-in every day. And that doesn't even need to be a written thing. That can be let me just sit for 30 seconds or stand, or even sometimes I do it when I'm laying in bed at first and just be like, how am I feeling physically? Am I tired? Are my muscles sore? How do I feel? How am I feeling emotionally? And how am I feeling energy-wise? And just noticing without a label of like, oh, I'm feeling this way, so it's going to be a bad day or whatever it is. Just noticing, this is how I'm feeling. Because when you know how you're feeling, then you know when you might be feeling a little off that you might need to put in some of these other tools. So that's kind of the first layer. If you don't have the awareness, it's really hard to implement stress management tools.
But do you know how few people actually take the time to check in with themselves? Because
most people don't.
You go through your entire lived experience in this body, and to say, okay, how do you feel? Because you talked about being a big fan of journaling. I am too. I love it. And a lot of times my journaling tends to be just brain dump, thought download, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah. And
then I can go to like structured, but a lot of people love, if they're going to journal, they want journal prompts. And that is the very first one for me is, how are you feeling? How are you really? Check in with yourself, because sometimes we just push ourselves to keep going. And you're like, there's a reason that your body is saying it's tired.
Right. I love to talk about real tangible tool. It's called a 5-body check-in. I learned this from Dr. Ariel Schwartz, who does a lot of work with the polyvagal theory and yoga. She also does a lot of work with like complex PTSD and all that. But her 5-body check-in, you say, how is my breath feeling? Is it shallow? Is it deep? Is it fast? Is it slow? How's my physical body feeling? So like muscles, joints, bones, like just kind of moving things around and seeing what's up. How are my emotions? What emotions am I feeling right now? How's my energy feeling? And depending on who you are, like sometimes I take that as like, am I fatigued? Am I excited? Or how am I feeling energetically in terms of like, am I feeling in alignment? Am I feeling on the right path? More of like that chakra energetics as well. The vibe. Yeah, exactly. I just want to make sure I got them all. Breathing body, physical body. Oh, and then mental body. Because sometimes emotional and mental body can be very different. Like you can be feeling a really strong emotion and then notice that your mental body your mind is really moving quickly. Or you can notice, oh, I'm feeling really happy, but my mind is moving a little slower. And just checking in with those 5: mental, physical, emotional, breathing, and energy body. And that's a really great place to start, and just noticing patterns.
That is almost the embodiment of everything that we've talked about.
Yeah.
I like that tool. I mean, one kind of stress management tool that I've used is that like body scan. So when you're talking about just that checking with your physical being, you start with the top of your head and you go down just incrementally. And I think of it in muscle groups, but we'll think of it as like you can go by body part and just check in of like, is that muscle relaxed? Is that muscle relaxed? And I know some people do that for helping to sleep as well, going through and making sure each muscle is relaxed. Because a lot of times our jaw is clenched, our shoulders are in our ears. My toes a lot of times are like curled underneath each other. And you're like, okay, I'm just going to relax all of this.
Totally. And a lot of people, to your point, don't realize what their physical body is doing when they're not consciously tuning into it.
And especially too during stressful times. Because our bodies take on so much of that stress. I mean, I work in dentistry. My full-time job is as a hygienist. And I can't tell you, the beginning of the pandemic, the number of people that came in and they were like, my jaw is wrecked. What is going on? And we're like, that is a physical symptom of your stress.
Yeah. I feel like if you haven't experienced that, sometimes it takes an extreme experience, like, oh my gosh, what is going on, to really recognize that. So it can be
jaw locking closed.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like, oh my gosh, I have to do something. But, ideally we won't all get to that space. So maybe starting a practice like a body scan or a 5-body check-in, you don't have to get to that space before you notice that the stress is affecting you. And I want to take it back to some other tangible tools, because to your point, I think that can be really helpful. One really overlooked one that's been impactful for me is finding joy, finding activities or places or people that just spark joy in my life and adding more of that. One of the people I've studied with, and I can't remember who it is right now, will often say that stress management isn't always about taking something out. It's about adding things in that give back to you. So for me, like a powerful thing has been adding in more joy. And that looks like maybe I'm watching the sunset. And actually a big thing this year has been reading fiction books. Like I love reading. And I could read nonfiction.
When we stop recording, we need to chat, because I love reading as well.
But like giving myself the permission to read really some of my fun, call them guilty pleasure books that, might not be furthering my education in any means, but I just get great joy in diving into the story. That has done more for my stress management than I can even tell you right here and right now.
I freaking love reading fantasy.
Yes, me too.
I read fiction and nonfiction alike because I love reading in general, but the bringing joy piece is something that I come back to when I have conversations with clients who are struggling, and maybe they're struggling with stress. Maybe they're struggling with their workouts. Maybe they're struggling in general. And I ask them, when's the last time that you did something that you felt joy? When is the last time that you did something that you kind of lost yourself in and found that, I don't know if you want to call it flow state or whatever, you just forget that you're doing something for the sake of doing it, for the sake of enjoyment. You're not practicing French because you want to learn the French language. You're not reading this book because you're trying to learn about astrophysics. You are doing it simply for the sake of enjoyment. I'm pretty sure I'm actually like an 85-year-old inside, because the patients at work that I connect the most with are in their 70s and 80s. And we're like, oh my God, I did this really great 1,000-piece Ravensburger puzzle last week and it brought me so much joy. Those things. Or we read the same books, or like I grew up crocheting and knitting and all of that. And I'm like, yeah, I'm a baby grandma. It's fine.
I love it. When you were just talking about all those things and bringing joy, I actually felt this deep sense of excitement for, I have a day off this weekend and I'm like, oh my gosh, I just can't wait to get lost in like crafts and books and walking outdoors. And it really is just, it's sparking so much joy. And, I'm not kidding when I say I feel a sense of warmth and calm that washes over me, just knowing that I have the space for that. It makes me so much happier and more confident in who I am when I give myself that time to find joy.
For me, it's hard to do.
Yes, 100%.
Because our society is so focused on constant productivity, on constant doing instead of being.
Yep. It's an unlearning. You have to unlearn it. I'm still unlearning it. Like I'm saying, I have a day off on Sunday and I'm sure I still have a to-do list that I'm going to have to.
I was going to say, do you have a sticky note somewhere that you're like, this isn't a priority right now. This self-care piece is more important. I get it. Actually, my nonfiction current book is called Laziness Does Not Exist.
So and check it out.
It is challenging so much of what I think motivates me and why I continue to do the things and why I struggle with sitting down and being quote unquote unproductive.
Right.
So,
oh my gosh, that could be a whole nother podcast. I got to talk about that. that for like 3 hours, I think, because I'm in the process of unlearning all of that myself. And, even with all my knowledge on stress management, and I think that's another takeaway I'll say to people, like, this isn't a perfect process. Even though I have all this knowledge on physical tools on how to manage stress and body-based tools and breath work and meditation and the mindset, like I have all the information in the world. I really do have, and I have access to it by the internet as well. I'm still unlearning that piece of you don't always need to be productive. And that process in itself is I don't want to say it's a stress management tool, but it's a part of the process of building awareness and building awareness around how you handle stress, how you operate in daily life, then therefore how it affects your self-confidence and body image. It's all interconnected.
You just brought that full circle.
Happy to.
I love that.
Yeah. It's something I think about a lot.
I think that is a really good place to wrap up body image, self-confidence, and stress. But I want to talk about you for a minute. I have a few rapid fire questions before we wrap up. Okay. This is a very important question to me. What is your favorite kind of cookie?
Ooh, this is a tough one. So I have chocolate chip girl through and through, but one of my aunts used to make, and it's going to sound bizarre, these cream cheese spritzers. Yeah, surprisingly fantastic. They remind me of Christmas because that's when I always ate them.
Okay, explain these cookies.
There's like actual cream cheese in it, and which you would be like, ew, gross. But there's also like obviously sugar and all that good stuff. But there's these just little fluffy balls of goodness, which she always put sprinkles on top. And
are they soft? Are they chewy? Are they crispy?
Not crispy, a little soft.
Okay.
And not chewy per se, like not overly fluffy, like fluffy and soft with a slight hard edge to them.
Okay, I'm gonna need to explore this. I'll
send you the recipe.
Okay. And this applies to our conversation. My next question for you: what is one activity that brings you joy and takes your attention away from your body?
I think for me, that's ever changing depending on the season of life that I'm in.
Okay, current season.
Anything outdoors. I live in New England, and we just had our first snow, but the fall colors this year have been like absolutely magical. So anytime I could just, whether it be walking or hiking or standing out, probably walking or hiking outdoors, I just feel so much joy in the ability to be outdoors and experience it.
Me too. I love that. What is the number one book that you've recommended or given as a gift?
Ooh, this is tough. I've read almost 50 books this year, which is like my crowning achievement for the year. Forget about everything else I do.
Are you on Goodreads?
I am.
Okay, we're
connecting. So I'll give one fiction book and one nonfiction book. Okay. A fiction book that I loved this year. Oh, there's even too many there. But I'll say the first one, The House of Salt and Sorrow by Erin Craig. It's like kind of a fantasy retelling of a folklore, and it just, I could read it again. It was so, so good. And then nonfiction, one that I read a couple of years ago that I actually was surprised I loved it so much, but it explained the nervous system and some of our reactions to it in such a great way, is called Call of the Wild by Kimberly Ann Johnson. How we heal trauma, awaken our power, and use it for good. And it was a great book in general, but also as a practitioner, it broke down some of the stress and nervous system things that I talk about with my clients in a really grounded, science-based way without weighing people down with fancy words and complicated
layman's terms.
Yeah. It did talk a lot about, sexuality and vitality and that as well. But once again, in a really grounded way that I think whether you're 30 or 70, you could take something away from that book.
That's fantastic. Okay, last question. How do you take your coffee or tea or morning beverage of choice?
I go through seasons with coffee as well. I'm currently in my coffee season. I definitely tend to drink coffee more once it gets cold out. And I am totally like a seasonal coffee gal. This morning, I treated myself to a Starbucks as well. And I got something ridiculous like sugar cookie almond milk latte. And it was just so good.
Oh, so their holiday stuff is out.
Holiday stuff is out. My boyfriend was like, is that a Christmas coffee? I was like, it is.
And it brings brings me joy.
And I was
Thank
like,
you.
I'm all into it. He's like, all right, great for you, babe. Enjoy.
I love that. So good. Kerry, thank you so much for being on. This has been such a rad conversation. I feel like we could definitely have a part 2 and talk all things laziness and productivity. I would love to pick your mind on like yoga and your entire yoga journey, but I'm proud of us for keeping this decently focused.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It's been wonderful.
If you enjoyed this podcast episode, please feel free to follow, subscribe, like, whatever the heck you do with podcasts. As always, stay sturdy, friends, and we'll talk to you next week.